I thought my anniversary trip to the mountains would be a romantic escape, but I ended up in a cell facing an enormous term for a crime I didn't commit. One moment I was a typical accountant, and the next I was trapped in an organized scheme where the only person I could trust was the man who had supposedly betrayed me. I had the perfect itinerary for the weekend: 3 days in a boutique mountain resort to celebrate my 10th wedding anniversary. Mark and I had saved for months, anticipating the crisp air, the stone-walled suites, and the silence of the peaks. We were supposed to be sipping vintage wine by a crackling fireplace, rediscovering the versions of ourselves that existed before mortgages and career burnout. Instead, I am sitting in a sterile interrogation room, the fluorescent hum of the ceiling lights vibrating against my skull, trying to piece together how a weekend getaway turned into a descent into the absolute void. The nightmare didn't start with a scream or a crash. It started with a misplaced bag. When we arrived at the resort, the concierge had been remarkably efficient. Too efficient, perhaps. He whisked our luggage away with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, promising to have everything delivered to our room while we checked in. By the time we walked into our suite, the bags were already there, tucked neatly near the velvet ottoman. Mark was breathless with excitement, pulling me into a hug, talking about how he had booked a private chef for the final night. I remember looking at that bag, a sleek charcoal gray carry-on I'd bought specifically for the trip, and feeling a strange, hollow twinge of anxiety. It wasn't until midnight when I reached for my toiletry kit that the world shifted. I unzipped the side pocket, expecting my skincare, but my fingers brushed against something cold, hard, and unmistakably heavy. I pulled it out. It was a vacuum-sealed plastic bundle, heavy with a substance I had only seen in grainy crime documentaries. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked over at Mark, who was fast asleep, his chest rising and falling in perfect, peaceful rhythm. I was shaking so violently that the plastic crinkled, a sound that seemed loud enough to wake the dead. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I shoved the bundle back, my mind racing through 100 impossible scenarios. The next morning, the air in the resort felt different. The friendly concierge I'd seen the day before was gone, replaced by a stern-faced man with a wire in his ear who tracked our movement with eyes that felt like lasers. I tried to act normal, to sip my coffee and smile, but every time the heavy oak doors of the lobby swung open, I flinched. We decided to leave early, to cut the trip short and just drive away from the suffocating pressure of the mountains. But as we pulled our car toward the exit, the gravel road was blocked. 2 black SUVs cut us off, tires spraying dirt against our bumper. Doors flew open, and men in dark tactical gear swarmed us. They didn't give us a chance to speak. They yanked Mark out of the driver's seat, pinning him to the asphalt with a brutal efficiency that left no room for resistance. I was dragged out from the passenger side, my wrists zip-tied so tightly that the plastic dug into my skin. I screamed for the manager, for the police, for anyone to explain what was happening. One of the officers leaned in close, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that cut through the mountain wind. "You've been implicated in an organized scheme," he said, his face a mask of cold indifference. "We found the illegal weapon and the packages with the substance in your vehicle. You're looking at an enormous term in federal prison." I stared at him, my mouth agape, unable to process the accusation. We were just a couple on vacation. We were accountants, for heaven's sake. But then, as they hauled me toward the back of the transport van, I saw him, the concierge. He was standing by the resort entrance, lighting a cigarette. He looked directly at me and slowly, deliberately, tapped the side of his nose. In that instant, I realized the bag wasn't ours, and we weren't being arrested for a crime. We were being framed as scapegoats for a massive criminal operation. And the worst part? As I was shoved into the darkness of the van, I saw Mark being led toward a separate vehicle, and his face told me everything. He knew exactly who was behind this. The darkness inside the transport van smelled of damp steel and stale exhaust. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain through my zip-tied wrists, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the screaming void in my chest. Who was Mark? My husband of 10 years, a man who spent his evenings balancing spreadsheets and complaining about the neighbor's dog, had looked at that concierge with an expression of cold, professional recognition. It wasn't the look of a terrified victim. It was the look of a partner caught in the final act of a long con. We were processed in a facility that felt more like a bunker than a station. The intake process was mechanical, stripping away my dignity along with my jewelry and clothes. I was shoved into a holding cell that felt like an icebox. The walls were covered in deep, jagged scratches, reminders of the souls who had occupied this space before me. My mind was a carousel of terror. Was I married to a stranger? Had our entire decade of shared memories been a meticulously crafted stage play designed to lead to this exact moment? The service of internal security arrived 3 hours later. They didn't ask questions. They delivered demands. They wanted names, locations, and a confession that would put me away for an enormous term. When I insisted I was innocent, the lead officer just laughed, a dry, humorless sound. He placed a folder on the metal table between us. Inside were photos of me, taken in secret over the last 6 months. I saw myself shopping for groceries, leaving the office, walking the dog. But in the background of every single photo, there was someone else. A man in a gray coat, lurking in the periphery, orchestrating my life like a puppeteer. "You are not just a mule," the officer sneered, leaning into my personal space until I could smell the sharp tang of his coffee. "You are the face of this organized scheme. We know you were moving the illegal weapon and the packages with the substance across state lines. Your husband has already started talking. He's cutting a deal to save himself, and he's painting you as the mastermind." The floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. The betrayal felt like a physical weight, crushing the air out of my lungs. I wanted to howl, to scream until my throat bled, but I knew that would only confirm their suspicions. I kept my head down, my gaze fixed on the concrete floor. That was when I noticed it. Taped to the underside of the metal table was a small, torn scrap of paper. I waited until the officer left to take a call, his voice echoing loudly in the hallway, before I risked reaching under the table. My trembling fingers peeled the tape back. The note was written in Mark's unmistakable, cramped cursive. It contained only 3 words: "Don't trust them." My blood ran cold. If Mark was the one who had framed me, why would he warn me? And if he wasn't the one who had framed me, then who was he talking to in the transport van? I looked up, scanning the room for a camera, and saw the red light blinking rhythmically in the corner. Then the heavy door groaned open. It wasn't the officer who walked in. It was a lawyer I had never seen before, a woman with sharp features and eyes that betrayed no emotion. She sat down, clicked her briefcase shut, and looked at me with chilling familiarity. "Mark isn't talking to the police," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ventilation. "He's talking to the people who really run this facility, and they've already decided how you're going to die." The lawyer's words hung in the air, heavier than the concrete walls surrounding us. Before I could process the threat, she leaned in, her voice dropping to a frantic, barely audible rasp. The Service of Internal Security isn't here to save you, and they aren't the ones calling the shots. This facility is a front for the group, and your husband didn't frame you. He tried to get you out. She slid a small encrypted keycard across the table, hiding it beneath her sleeve. They found out he was an informant. They're using you as leverage to keep him silent. If you want to survive the next 10 minutes, follow the ventilation duct behind that loose panel in the corner. A car is waiting at the perimeter fence. I didn't think. I moved. Panic fueled a burst of adrenaline that blurred my vision. As the lawyer stood up and loudly demanded a file from the guard to create a diversion, I lunged for the wall. The panel popped off with a metallic shriek, but the hallway noise masked it. I squeezed into the narrow, suffocating space, crawling over jagged metal edges that tore at my clothes and skin. Below me, I could hear the shouting start, the realization that I was gone. I scrambled through the dark, lungs burning, guided only by the faint light filtering through the air grates. I emerged into the cold night air behind the loading docks, just as a black sedan screeched around the corner. The door flew open, and there was Mark. He was bloodied, his shirt torn, but his eyes were clear, burning with a desperate, singular focus. I didn't ask questions. I dove inside, and we peeled away into the mountain fog. For miles, we didn't speak. My heart was a frantic drum, echoing the terror of the last 48 hours. Finally, as the lights of the city began to shimmer in the distance, Mark pulled onto a desolate overlook and killed the engine. "They've been using our financial firm as a conduit for years," he said, his voice raw. "I realized it 6 months ago. I've been working with a specialized unit of the Justice Department to document every transfer, every package, every piece of illegal weapon movement. I tried to keep you out of it, but they found out. They knew they couldn't control me, so they decided to use you to break me." He reached into the glove box and pulled out a stack of documents, hard evidence that would dismantle the entire organized scheme, from the concierge to the corrupted officials running that bunker. "Is it over?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mark looked at me, a sad, exhausted smile touching his lips. "It's the end of the nightmare. Yes, but we can never go back to who we were. We have to disappear, and we have to do it now." He handed me a burner phone and a set of IDs. We weren't just fleeing a vacation gone wrong anymore. We were starting a life in the shadows. The next morning, as news reports broke about a failed internal security audit and a series of high-level arrests at the mountain resort, we were already crossing the state line. I looked out the window at the rising sun, the golden light hitting the peaks where the horror had begun. The 3 days that should have been our happiest anniversary had cost us our past, our security, and our innocence. But as I held Mark's hand, feeling the solid, living warmth of it, I realized the nightmare hadn't destroyed us. It had stripped away the thin veneer of our comfortable, oblivious lives and revealed the truth. We were stronger than the people who tried to break us. We were no longer the accountants who spent their days in quiet offices. We were survivors, and for the first time in our 10 years of marriage, we were finally, truly awake. We didn't look back at the mountains. We drove into the light, ready to build a new existence, one where the only thing we had to fear was the memory of the cage we had just escaped.